Hello everyone, it's a beautiful rainy day at Studio Magnolia. We've set up a working station here under the roof, and today we are going to work on making coil pots. So here we have some examples of some coil pots or bowls. This one I left so that you could see the coils and you could see how it was made. And you know, that does add a design element to it. So you may choose to leave the coils showing, or you could do something like this where you smooth them out so that your resulting bowl or pot looks very smooth, and you might have no idea it was made out of coils to begin with. So there's different ways that we can finish them that we'll talk about later on the rim. Different shapes that you can have. You can see here I made a mug using coils, so I just did the coil pot technique and then added a handle the way we did on the last mug. And you can use coils to make any kind of structure very consistent in its thickness and very strong in its strength. So you can see I wasn't too creative with my design, mainly because I had to make something within, a 45-minute time frame. But now that we're working at home, there's no excuse to not think it through beforehand and think about all the different possibilities and shapes of things that you can make. So I don't want you to feel limited to making something just like what I made. So these are sort of a typical bottle shape where you have a narrow neck and a wide bottom. You can have columns or cylinders similar to what we made with slabs. Here you have traditional pot vessel shape with a lip on it. And you can see they left this one to show the coil method. You can scrape it out or only scrape out some of it. You can let the coils show. So I think this time I want to go ahead and make something a little bit different than what I've made before. Maybe something like a ancient vessel type vase shape, and I'm going to take you over to the studio and show you how to get started. So I highly recommend that you sit down and plan and think about what you want to make before you make it. So you can get out a piece of paper and draw. I think a great idea would be to get on the internet and look up ancient pottery, traditional pottery, or vessels, things like that. I'm just going to do a little sketch here on the clay, kind of my plan, so I can sort of have a plan in mind. I'm going to have a narrow base, maybe add some handles on the side. This might remind you of something you've seen in a museum. This is sort of an ancient form, because as you can imagine, being able to create a vessel that can hold water was a huge step forward for civilization. Once we were able to store water and heat food in the fire, that freed up a lot of our time for other intellectual pursuits. So when you look back in history, you will see that coil making is a strategy that has been used by all kinds of ancient cultures, Native American cultures, ancient Greek cultures. A lot of times you might have a tendency to think of some of the giant pots made in Africa, which is a traditional craft of a lot of the women still in Africa. And one of the reasons that it's so popular in Africa is because not everyone has electricity, and this is something that you can do without a wheel that doesn't need to be plugged in. You can fire it in an actual fire, and so you don't need electricity to create functioning pottery. So what I did was I went ahead and pre-made some coils. Now you can see that they're all very similar in diameter. The main thing you're going for when you make your coils is consistency. Okay, so what you want in the end is a pot that's going to be the same thickness all the way through, that's going to give strength to its structure and integrity to its design. So what I've done is I've covered these up with a wet rag and saved them. I didn't want to make you watch me roll 50 coils, so I went ahead and rolled some ahead of time. And now I'm going to show you how you can do it at home. First, you're just going to kind of take a chunk of clay. Now I kneaded and wedged my clay and got it nice and soft and consistent before I started. And you're going to kind of squeeze it to make like a sausage shape. Basic sausage shape. Then, we've done this before, but this time we're making longer, bigger, and more quantity of coils. And then you're gonna take your hand and you're just gonna roll. And I'm really using all of my fingers and all of my palm to do this. Now, as I'm rolling, hear how it's kind of going ka-dunk, 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 ka-dunk. What it's done is it wants to kind of flatten. It sort of chosen a spot and flattened. And so I want to make it equal on both sides, almost square. So I'm going to squeeze it so that its length is equal to its width. It's more like a square now. And then start rolling again. Now, it doesn't really matter how long or how short your coils are. See how it's starting to break there? I can just go ahead and break it. You're going to connect them all anyways, so if you have a bunch of short coils, it's okay. Ideally you want some long ones, but any size will work. The main thing is that the thickness is consistent. You want it to be about the thickness of your thumb. You don't want it to be too thin, because we have some room to work with that way. If it's as big as your thumb, then you can still kind of squeeze it or carve it down or scrape it down to the thickness of just a regular finger, and you've got a little bit of extra to work with. So if I spread my fingers, I can get kind of better coverage of a space and get a little bit more efficient. So here's my coil. Okay, so now that we have some coils made, we want to think about the base of our pot. So there's a couple different ways that you can go about this. You could take your coil and curl it like this. Ideally you would want to score and slip the parts that are touching. And then you could take your fingers and start smoothing it in like this. This clay is really soft, which is why I didn't score and slip, because I'm gonna just make everything turn into one. So you could do that, and that could be your base. Or you could take a ball of clay and make a sphere like we talked about. Stick your thumb in and start making a pinch pot base. So here we've got a pinch pot base. So if this is going to be my base, I'm going to kind of press it a little bit so that it's nice and sturdy, so that it has a sturdy base to set on. And then you're going to do some good old scoring and slipping. You're definitely going to want a fork for this project because it is time consuming, and that's going to save you some time. Then you're going to take the coil and you're going to score and slip the entire coil, just one side of it. And you're going to take the coil and you're going to put the two scored and slipped sides down against each other, and you're going to press it down. Now, once we get here where we've hit the original coil, this part's pre-scored and slipped, right? But this part isn't. So you've got to continue to score and slip as you're going. And then you're just going to keep going and going and going. And what you would do is you would take your next coil and you would connect it here, and you just keep going until you have a bowl of a good shape that you like. Now what I'm going to do is, since I've given you an example of how to start, that's exactly how I started my mug, and exactly how I started my bowl. But I want to show you the other options. So I'm going to put that aside, and I'm going to come over here where I have rolled a slab with the rolling pin. So what I want is a much wider base, so that I can go big. So you guys don't have a time limit on how long we can spend doing this. So I'm going to draw a circle. You could take like an actual plate or something that's actually perfectly circular to trace, which is always a good trick to try to use. It's probably better than freehanding it. But I want this to be the size of my vase. So I want to make a very big vase. And what I have always told the kids when we were in class, and our classes were about 50 minutes long, was that for this project they were required to spend more than one class. So I wanted them to pack it up and, you know, make a long-term commitment. So I would like you to spend at least an hour to an hour and a half, you know, maybe even longer. I want you to try to go big. So we've made small mugs and bowls. I want you to try to make something of significant size for this project. So I'm gonna take this slab and peel it off. Remember how we talked about never wanting to get our pieces stuck? And I'm going to score and slip all around the edges. I'm gonna make a wide area because I'm gonna curve the base up maybe a little bit around the bottom. So if you started something with like a pinch pot like this, you know, you have a limit of what you can do. But if you're starting a nice flat base, you can go real big. Now I'm going to score and slip my coil. Now, as you can see, this is already getting repetitive. That's why at the very beginning we talked about texture and pattern, and just to sort of give you a taste of how important repetition is, both in design and in, you know, the actual creation of a functional, sturdy piece of art. So this is something that maybe you had done when you were young, so it's something that doesn't take a bunch of special skill. The one skill that it takes is patience, or perseverance, you might say. So that's what I want you to do, is just sort of get into a groove, get into a little assembly line. If you want to pre-make a bunch of coils like I did, you can. If you want to make them one at a time and you feel like you want to roll and then stick and roll and then stick to mix it up a little, you can do it that way. So see how I'm applying pressure? I'm not just applying pressure, but then I'm kind of wiggling to make sure that there's a connection. Okay, so again, this part is scored and slipped, but this part isn't. Alright, and I am going to secure the connection better, but what I'm going to do is just go ahead and get a bunch of coils attached, and then spend some time meshing all the coils together once I have quite a stack assembled. Coils. So for my slip, I just used really dry, just totally dry clay. Put it in a bowl and filled it with water, and the dry clay actually absorbs the water faster, just like a dry sponge is going to absorb water faster. It turns instantly into slip. And we talked about before how slip is basically like the mortar in between any two pieces of clay that you want to connect. So imagine yourself just like a brick mason. If you don't have good connection on that chimney or that wall you're building, it's just going to fall apart. So it's all about connection, which is both the mortar or the glue or the slip, but also pressure. And then you can, in addition, use your fingers to kind of smooth them together. And we're going to do a little bit more of that later. Going to go to where we left off. See how this coil is a little bit thicker, so what I'm doing is squeezing it to make it the same thickness, which means it'll be a little bit taller, so that's fine. What we're going for is the same thickness right here, all the way around. You can see it cracked right there, but it's okay, I just smoothed it right back together. So this is a good project to do while listening to music or a book on tape. Because I should say an audiobook. We don't have them on tapes anymore. Or you could do this with a friend. I have put students into teams before so that you could really get a production line going, get some size. Now see how that, I didn't connect that just right, it's okay. I'm going to break it, stick it like that. And then I'm just going to meld these two pieces. Now my clay is very soft. In some ways that makes it easier, in other ways it makes it flimsy. So this is a good project to work on in steps. So like if I want to really go up in size on this, I could let this bottom part harden a little bit before I start adding a lot of height. So what I want is for my piece to be narrower at the bottom and wider in the middle. And right now I'm kind of just going straight up. So I'm going to have to try to either stretch it, but ideally what you're going to want to do is pull the coils off and make them like this. See how it's coming out like this? So it's going to get wider as it gets taller. And then I'm going to take this bottom part and smush them together. Now, when you smush everything together, you are losing a tiny bit of thickness. The other thing you can do is similar to what we did with the box, which is you can roll with your hand like this, some very skinny coils. Put them in the crevices, and that's going to make it easier to smooth without making the overall thickness less. Now you can use tools for this. This is like a piece of wood. You could use a knife, or you can just scrape it together. You could wait to do this later after you have more height. And if you want like an overall finish, you can choose to do the finish at the end. Just remember that if you're spending a lot of time, that it's going to get harder at the bottom where it's older than at the top. So see how there's a hole? I'm going to take just a dollop of clay here. I just grabbed, a little pinch, And I'm just going to fill the hole like that. So remember, we want to think about the overall plan, which is that I want this to be leaning out, and then it's going to create the base for future coils. Okay, so here we've got a start, and you can see that clay is a little bit soft. What I probably should do is walk away for 15 minutes, let it harden just a little bit, and start back again. Now the skinnier the coil, the faster it's going to dry out. Especially want this edge to be nice and secure. Okay, so I'm going to let it harden a little bit while I roll some coils. I'm not going to make you watch me while I roll the coils. It's a little bit wobbly. So we'll take a little break and I'll make a little bit more progress, and then we'll check back in together so you can see how it's going. And I went back over here to the pinch pot that I had started, and what I wanted to do was make sure that I had the right shape that I want to begin with. So you can see it was a pinch pot, and then I made sure that the edges really flare out a lot at the bottom. So if you don't get that width that you're going for the roundness of your pot, if you don't start leading it outwards at the beginning, you're going to have a hard time making that happen later. So the main thing I'm concerned with is this overall shape and flare of my pot. And I've gone ahead and scored and slipped some of these coils so that you didn't have to watch me do that. And you can go ahead and try to prepare some stuff like that, but just don't take it too far, because remember when we talked about the more surface area a piece of clay has, the faster it dries out. Well, a coil is going to dry out a lot faster than the actual pot. So that's why I have this wet rag here that I am putting over my coils. So you'll want to do the same thing. And we're going to start attaching, and as I'm attaching, I'm putting it on the outer edge, because once I start putting it on the inner edge, I'm going to be bringing it in and making it smaller. So since I want this to be a bowl that's going to keep getting wider and wider, I'm going to keep attaching each coil sort of to the outer edge of the previous coil. Apply some pressure. You definitely want the softest clay that you're using to be the coil clay, because those are going to be being bent and smushed into each other, which requires softness. But as you're applying that pressure to smooth them into each other, you don't want to be crushing the understructure. So you definitely don't want to let the coils harden and then have them be harder than your bowl underneath. See how this kind of stretched out? I can just sort of push it back into itself. So when the clay is soft, you can always fix any mistakes that you've made. It's a very forgiving medium. So what I did was I had it too tight. I wasn't following my own advice, so I pulled it off, and then I'm going to reattach. You want to make the majority of your shape changing by where you're laying the last coil, not by taking your hands and pulling or stretching. That's kind of a last resort. If you do that too much, you're going to continually make your clay thinner and thinner until it no longer has a consistent thickness or a structure that can hold up. So that can be hard. That's why you always want to have your end product in mind with each coil that you're attaching. sort of a weak point there, so I'm going to take just a little handful of soft clay and just kind of stick it in there. Now I'll stick some on the inside, and then I'll stick some on the outside, because if I'm pushing from the outside, I'm less likely to stretch it out. If I keep adding to the inside, I'm going to keep stretching and stretching from the inside. And remember that even though your viewpoint is going to be, a lot of the times, this viewpoint looking down in, that it's the outer silhouette that's going to give it its main shape. So don't forget to sort of step back and look at it and think about what it looks like from the outside. Had a really thin spot in there, so I just broke it and removed the thin spot. I can smush it together a little bit too, to make sure I've got somewhat consistent coil before I attach it. Feel like I'm getting to the top or to the rim, so I really flattened my coil to make it, I'm trying to reach level now. So now I'm going to start changing the thickness of the coils in order to try to make the top the height I want it, and so that I have a final top coil that smooths right into the end. At this point you can see how it's lower, and I'm not even going to add a real coil at this point. I'm taking some of this really soft clay that I have, and I'm just kind of making, I guess it's kind of a coil, but it's very, very soft and thin. I'm just kind of adding a top layer. Don't really want to add height anymore. I just want to even out so that the whole rim is the same height. And adding some extra, just little pinches of clay to some skinny areas or some weak points that I might find. That's what it looks like. So at this point, I'm done with the basic structure, and from here on out, it'll be perfecting the texture and the overall shape. I can add pattern. So what I'm doing now is I'm filling in the crevices between the coils, because I want mine to stay about this thickness. Now I could take the knife and I could scrape like this and just smooth it that way, then that would be taking away from the thickness. But if you've got soft clay, you can kind of add and fill in the crevices. And I want to let this harden up a little bit so that I can come back to you in the morning and show you some pattern and finishing techniques, things you can do to the top, decorative flourishes and things like that. But the most important thing I want to do, since I'm wanting it to harden, it's not that everything is perfect, but I do want the overall shape to be perfect. That means like the roundness, if it's too thin or too wide, I want to fix that now. And I want to make it have that general structure. If it's coming out too wide on the bottom, I can kind of push it in. And I'm just making sure that the balance is right. You're also going to want to make sure that it has a flat bottom so that your bowl doesn't just roll around on the table while you're trying to use it. So I'm going to leave you for now, and I will let these harden, and I will see you tomorrow for the next steps. Okay, so what I'm gonna do to let these harden up a little bit, remember I don't want them to dry. If I just leave them out like this and go to bed and come back tomorrow, they're gonna be bone dry and there's not gonna be any working with them. So I'm not gonna spritz them, but I'm gonna take some plastic and I'm going to put the plastic over top like this. And I'm putting it kind of down to the ground, but I'm not sealing it. I'm not going to wrap it up and put a rubber band. So there's still going to be some airflow, and it's going to dry a little bit, not a lot. So make sure to keep checking on your piece and make sure it's not getting too hard. And if you don't want to come back, if you don't want to wait like a day, just leave the plastic off and walk away for like 30 minutes or something like that. Set a timer. And you may just be able to do that. But if you're going to, let's say, go back to it tomorrow, definitely put the plastic over it and then keep checking on it. When it gets to that point that we call leather hard, where it's somewhat firm but still soft, then you're going to want to take the plastic, wrap it all the way around, seal it with a clothespin or a rubber band so that you can keep it at that softness. So you always want to monitor the drying rate of your clay, otherwise you could get into a situation you don't want to get into.